Today I will try to provide you a quick overview of noise, handshakes, the noise protocol framework. And now this can be used to achieve strong hand-to-hand authenticated encryption, so communication channel between two parties, Alice and Bob. So what is the main problem we would like to address? So we have two parties, Alice and Bob, that wants to exchange messages, wants to communicate, and of course they want to encrypt their messages to increase their privacy. They have multiple approaches possible. So the first one is to use public key cryptography, where each of these user, Alice and Bob, has a public key which can be public, and encryption can be done directly using these public keys. However, public key crypto has a disadvantage that is lower, although has the benefits that doesn't need to share and keep private encryption keys. Another approach is based on symmetric cryptography, where we have very fast symmetric ciphers, but as I was mentioning before, the encryption keys should and must be kept secret and shared previously before starting encrypted messages. A third way is an hybrid approach, where we use public key cryptography to share some key material, and then this key material is used with symmetric ciphers to encrypt messages. So one of the most famous key agreement schemes based on this idea of public key to recover secrets for symmetric encryption is Diffie-Hellman key exchange. And Diffie-Hellman key exchange is based on the discrete logarithm assumption, which formally says that given a group, which is commutative and finite, and given two elements P and Q, it is hard to find the discrete logarithm of Q in base P. So given that, we can sketch a very rough key exchange where Alice selects some random value S, which is a scalar, and computes S times P, where P is a generator of this group G, and sends this SP to Bob. Bob does the same with his secret T value and sends TP to Alice, and then both parties, due to the commutativity of the group G, are able to compute STP and TSP, which is equal. So then Alice and Bob sets the secret to some value derived from this STP. And the main assumption here, which is very related to the discrete logarithm assumption, which is also called computational Diffie-Hellman, is that an attacker who sees the value capital P, SP, and TP, he cannot compute the value STP. But only Alice and Bob, who knows the two scalar S and T, can from these three values. Okay, so based on this computational problem, Alice and Bob can then use one or more Diffie-Hellman operations to recover this secret, which is STP, that they are the only one that are able to compute it, and then they might set as an encryption key. They might set the key as the hash of this secret. Multiple Diffie-Hellman operations can be used also to strengthen the security of exchange secrets and also to mutually authenticate parties. We'll see later how. And so based on this very rough overview of Diffie-Hellman, we can start sketching a first scheme. So where Alice and Bob just generate random ephemeral key pair, private public, where they consist of a scalar EA for Alice, and EAP is the public key. EA is the private key. And so Alice generates this random value EA, sends EA to P, Bob generates EB, and sends EAB to P to Alice. Then they recover the secret EA, EB, capital P, and they compute a hash, and then they set the secret to this hash. What is the problem with this approach? So by generating random key pairs is that Alice has no guarantee that the public key received is from Bob, and the same happens for Bob, that he cannot authenticate the ephemeral key received from Alice. Yes. So please, Anas. Sure. It's recording. Yeah. Sure. No, the scalar EA is not sent. It's sent only EAP. So probably the notation is a bit misleading here. So it's only the public key which is sent to Bob. So Alice generates EA and sends to Bob EAP, and Bob generates EB and sends EBP to Alice. So what the attacker sees are the generator P, EAP, and EAB, and this from this triple tuple, which is also called computation diffeomant assumption, it is believed to be hard to compute the secret EA-EBP from this tuple PEA. So yes, so probably, yeah, welcome. And okay, so the problem with this ephemeral diffeomant key exchange is that these ephemeral keys are not authenticated. So in fact, an attacker that tries to impersonate or just replaces the role of one of the two parties can send its own ephemeral key. So the way we can try to address this problem is to provide users with a long-term static public key, which is again another key pair where Alice and Bob possess this private key SASB, small sa and small sb respectively, and the corresponding public key capital SA and capital SB. And if this case were previously known to Alice and Bob, then they can use them to mutually authenticate diffeomant operations and also exchange messages, as we have seen before. The problem by using only static keys is that as soon as one of those keys gets compromised, then all derived symmetric encryption keys will be retrieved. So all the secrets can be easily retrieved that were generated from the compromised symmetric key. So how we can actually address again this is we can use an hybrid approach. So mixing ephemeral and static key operation between them. So in this example here, Alice knows Bob static key SB and Bob knows Alice static key SA. So they do again a first phase where they exchange ephemeral keys. So Alice sends to Bob capital EA and Bob sends to Alice capital EB. And then with these dashed arrows, I mean that they don't exchange anything, so there is nothing they exchange, but they do a diffeomant operations over the static key they know of the other party and the ephemeral key, their own ephemeral key. So for example, in the case of Alice, after the first exchange of ephemeral keys, Alice further computes a diffeomant operation over her private key small sa and Bob static key capital EB and recovers a secret, and Bob does the same over does the same but using the Alice static key and his own private ephemeral key, and then they do a third diffeomant operation using Bob secret static key and Alice ephemeral key. So at the end, they compute as the common shared secret the hash of the concatenation of, or a derivation function of these values, the concatenation of these three diffeom operations. So the first between Alice and Bob ephemeral keys, the second between Alice and Bob, Alice ephemeral key and Bob static key, and the third between Alice static key and Bob ephemeral key. So in this way, all these operations combine together the randomness given by the ephemeral key and the authentication guarantees provided by symmetric keys. Okay, so luckily there is a nice way to represent this kind of this kind of diffie-element patterns, key exchanges, and the previous can be sketched in this way. So we have like a pre-key agreement message where Alice sends to Bob her, not actually sends, but this is a short way to say, before the three dots, it's a short way to say that Bob knows Alice static key and Alice knows Bob static key before starting doing diffie-element operations. Then with this expression we denote that Alice sends to Bob an ephemeral key, Bob replies with another ephemeral key, and then they perform three diffie-element operation over ephemeral, which means the ephemeral key from Alice and the ephemeral key from Bob, then the static key from Alice and the ephemeral key from Bob, the ephemeral key from Alice and the static key from Bob. So this is in fact what is also known to be a noise handshake, and this will be the main topic of our goal. So Sanas asks if these key exchanges are authenticated. Yes, we will see them later. This is just an example that will guide our explanation of noise. But yes, so after that, because every time there exists a diffie-element operation which involves some kind of ephemeral and parties static keys, then you are kind of authenticating the final shared secret. But we will see it later how it works. Okay, so these handshakes, as I said, belongs to the noise protocol framework, which was designed by Trevor Perrin. And this framework provides a simple language to describe these diffie-element-based key agreement patterns, like the one we have seen before. They consist, very simply, this consists of exchanging message patterns, which consist of tokens. In this case, the tokens we already seen are ES, EE, ES, and SS, which means ephemeral, static keys, and diffie-element operation between ephemeral and static keys. And a collection of message patterns simply makes a handshake. Okay. Once an handshake is executed, multiple symmetric encryption keys can be derived and used to encrypt all the exchange messages. Let's try to see a bit deeper how this noise handshakes works and how the key material is derived. So in noise, every user maintains some variables updated. So some of them we already saw them, like the S and E variables, which they maintain the local user's static and ephemeral key. Then there exists another two variables which are remote S and remote E, RS and RE, where users will store the other party static and ephemeral public key. Then we have the H variable, which is the handshake hash value, where we will iteratively hash all sent and received handshake data and payload. We will see later. Then we have a chaining key, where we will hash all the outputs inside. We will hash all the outputs of Diffie-Hellman operations. And then finally we have an encryption key K and a nonce N, where the key is calculated from the shining key, and the nonce is not actually a random nonce as it is usual, but is actually a counter set to 0, which has a maximum value of 2 to the 64 minus 1. So this encryption key, once it's recovered, we'll see how, is used with an authenticated encrypted with associated data cipher, and the associated data is always the handshake hash value. Okay, so that every time we encrypt, we somehow bind the encryption with the noise handshake we're executing. All these variables are organized in 3 states, which are called handshake state, where we collect public keys. Public keys used for Diffie-Hellman operation. Then there exists this symmetric state where we store the handshake hash value and the chaining key. And then this creates, since the key is recovered from the chaining key, the encryption K is recovered from the chaining key. There is, on the lower level, there is a cipher state which contains the encryption key and the nonce N. Okay, so this is really what we have. So the variables used by the noise processing rules. So now let's just see how all these are initialized. So we have Alice and Bob. Alice and Bob wants to instantiate an handshake. So wants to start and instantiate an handshake. We will follow the example we have seen before. So first of all, everything is set to the empty variables, except of course for Alice local static key S variable, which is set to Alice static key SA, and the same for Bob, where it sets his own local static key to SB. All of the variables are empty. The first thing is that in noise, every handshake has a name. We will see later what kind of names, but we can think as that it summarizes the primitives used in noise and also the kind of handshake pattern the parties will undertake. So this name is what initializes both Alice and Bob states, and the name is hashed inside the handshake hash value. After this name is hashed inside, the chaining key is set equal to H, and that's it. After this, both Alice and Bob start processing the message patterns in the handshake. Okay, so in the example we have seen before, the first message pattern we see is the value of the. Okay, Sanaz is asking what is the value of the first H. H is set to empty as the first value, and I put this notation that you hash H concatenated with the protocol name is because we will see later this variable H is kept even after an handshake. So if you want to do a new handshake, you use the previous handshake hash value from before. So this means that at the beginning this H is empty. So at the very first time Alice and Bob undertakes an handshake, they just hash the protocol name, but later they will hash the previous handshake hash value H and then the new name of the new protocol, the new handshake they want to undertake. So this is why I use this notation here. Okay, so once the H and CK value are initialized, parties start reading through the message patterns. And in the example we have seen before, we have like a pre-handshake part, the part before the 3 dots, which somehow tells both parties that they know each other's static key. So even these tokens are processed to initialize the state, and the way they are processed is that simply since the first pattern refers to the fact that Bob knows Alice's static key, Alice's static key is firstly hashed in the handshake value in the handshake hash, sorry, in the handshake hash. So it's just concatenated to the previous value and hashed inside. Bob does the same because it's the first message, the process. Then, totally similarly, the rest is set as it was. Totally similarly, Bob and Bob static key is known to Alice, and this is hashed again in the handshake hash value. The rest is left unchanged. The first interesting thing happens when the real handshake starts. So Alice sends to Bob her own ephemeral key. So first of all, she sets her own E variable, the local variable, to the ephemeral key she just generated. Okay, and we didn't see before, but of course the variables are S and for both Alice and Bob are set to the respective values which are known. So now these three the both S and RS variables are set. Then Alice sends to Bob her ephemeral key. She sets her local variable E to EA, and Bob sets the remote ephemeral variable to EA. Again, this public key is hashed into the handshake hash value. Similarly, Bob sends to Alice his own random ephemeral key. So the RE and E variables for Alice and Bob are set accordingly, and again the H value hashes inside the new ephemeral key.
At this point, Alice and Bob are ready to perform their first Diffie-Hellman operation between their ephemeral keys. So, in particular, indeed, Alice and Bob perform a Diffie-Hellman operation between Alice ephemeral key EA and Bob ephemeral key EB. Once they do this Diffie-Hellman operation, they will recover a common secret, and this common secret is fed to HKDF, a key derivation function, with key the Channing key. This secret then is used to update two values, the Channing key CK with K1 and the cipher state key K with K2. So two keys are derived and they update respectively CK and K. And now that the cipher state has a key set, both parties can actually encrypt plaintext data. But at this point, they just perform the Diffie-Hellman operation. They continue their handshake, and at this point we have very similar to the previous step, but instead between Alice static key SA and Bob ephemeral key EB. Again, once they do their Diffie-Hellman operation between these two public keys, they recover a secret. This secret is fed to a key derivation function which takes as key the Channing key, and two keys are derived, K1 and K2, which again update the symmetric state CK and the cipher state K. Then, ongoing, they continue with the last operation, which is an ES operation, the Diffie-Hellman operation. Again, a new two keys are recovered, but at this time, since the message handshake is complete, so they finish their handshake, at the end of each message partner, there is implicitly a payload, and which in this case is empty because they are not exchanging any message. To authenticate this payload, both Alice and Bob, actually yes, Alice was sending the ciphertext to the other party, they encrypt an empty payload. So this is still possible since it's a stream cipher which is used internally. They can encrypt the empty payload, but they will compute an authentication tag here. And when they do this encryption with Chachapoli, they use as key the K from the cipher state has a nonce, the nonce, which enters as 0, but after the encryption is increased by 1. and as an additional data the handshake value H. So this ciphertext, which is computed at the end of a message pattern, which in this case is the encryption of an empty payload, so an empty text, enters the handshake hash value CT, which is then updated by applying an hash function with the previous hash value and this ciphertext. And this serves as to bind every message, every payload sent for each handshake message. It serves this encryption to bind the ciphertext, the authentication data, the symmetric state chaining key, and the cipherstate key all together in this handshake hash value.
So Sanas is asking if does it correspond to the authentication of Bob. So at this point, since we have yes, because now since we have a Diffie-Hellman, yes. So when we send the CT with SPM Bob, yes, yes, because since we are doing an ephemeral static with Bob static key, the only way for Bob to pass and compute the correct encryption and decryption key, which are the same, is to really possess the private key of SP, capital SP. So this is why you should send it at the end, because at this point only the real Bob can actually decrypt messages. Okay, because it passes the last Diffie-Hellman operation. So at this point that the handshake is completed with or without payloads, one thing happens. So both parties spawns two cipher states, one for inbound connection and one for outbound connections. And they use the symmetric key chaining key, CK, with a key derivation function with empty payload to derive two keys. One, again, for encrypting sent messages and one for decrypting received messages. Of course, to maintain the communication between Alice and Bob, the keys have a reverse order in Bob. So, for example, the inbound channel for Alice, so message sent for Alice, messages received from Alice, correspond to the outbound channel from Bob. So the key 1 is set for the cipher state 2 in the case of Bob. Okay. So once these two keys are generated with a key derivation function, we can discard the chaining key. So the chaining key is not used anymore, and we only keep the handshake hash. And the key one, so Sana's asking if the key 1, key 2 order depends on the initiator. Yes, because in this operation, the key derivation function returns two keys, and the first key goes yes to, this is according to the specification. Yes, Alice takes the first and the second, and Bob takes the second and the first. Yes, because in this case, Alice is the initiator of the handshake. And okay, so we discard the chaining key once we computed the two cipher states key, and we set the nonce to 0, and we keep the handshake hash, and this will be used later. We'll see later to have some kind of channel binding. Okay, so at this point, Alice and Bob are ready to encrypt and decrypt messages. So, and what they do is simply to use their, basically if it is an inbound or outbound cipher state. So if they want to encrypt sent messages or to decrypt received messages, they will just use the key, the proper key. And another thing they do is to hash every received or sent ciphertext into the handshake hash. So again, the handshake hash will collect all exchange messages from the beginning of the handshake. And another important thing is that every time we encrypt or decrypt, we have to increase the nonce by one. Okay. So in this case, Alice sends an encrypted message to Bob. So she uses the cipher state 2, and Bobby will use the cipher state 1 to decrypt. And then after encryption and decryption, they just increase the nonce by one. Another important thing is that here, when they encrypt, they don't use the hash value as associated data, but they use an empty associated data. Okay, they just encrypt and decrypt. Bob does the same, but of course in reverse order, and that's it. So at some point, Alice and Bob might wish to refresh their encryption key. And they can do something which is called rekey in the specification, and they simply encrypt. So for example, if they want to update a key k, so it doesn't matter if it is from cipher state 1 or 2 or both, they just encrypt with this k all zero payload of 32 bytes with a nonce equal to 2 to the 64 minus 1 and empty associated data, and they just take the first 32 bytes of this encryption. Okay, and this will be the new key. So this is just a way to refresh keys by encrypting all zeros payload, take the first 32 bytes, and then set the new key to this value. And this is called rekey and can be used, for example, every X message and so on by both Alice and Bob, or at every message. Why rekey is needed? For security reasons, and I would say, or if you reach the maximum nonce value, which is 2 to the 64 minus 1. Because there are some considerations related to the underlining symmetric cipher that you should not use more than 2 to the 64. For ISGCM, I guess it's 2 to the some power of 50, 56, if I'm not wrong. So it's for security reasons, actually, also to keep the nonce to 8 bytes instead of 12, which is supported, for example, by Chachapoli. And yes, but mainly for security reason, and to not also because nonce reuse is kind of catastrophic, so it's better to refresh the key. Once in a while, I would say. But definitely after 2 to the 64 encryption. So that's for sure. You must. Okay. But Asanas asks if the key gets refreshed at every round. Yes, this is a possibility, but it's not in the specification, so it's not a requirement. And we'll see later actually to have how we can do it to have a stronger forward security over sessions. We will see in the last slide. Okay. So of course we just followed the first example I gave at the beginning, but of course noise allows sketching and instantiation of many different handshakes, and these handshakes are based on the moment on when each of the party, Alice and Bob, sends his own static key. So in fact handshakes are named with two letters and numbers. So these letters are mainly N, A, X, and K. And the first letter, usually they consist of two letters in this case, or two letters and one or two numbers. And the first letter refers to Alice's static key, while the second letter refers to Bob's static key. So we'll see quickly some naming conventions of noise handshakes. So for example, N means that no static key is sent by both Alice and Bob. And in fact, in this handshake, only ephemeral keys are exchanged. I means that static key is immediately transmitted to the other party, and in fact in the first message immediately after the ephemeral key. Yes, Sanas is asking if NN is not authenticated. Yes, no, is not authenticated because no static key is exchanged and no diffeomon operation is done on a static key. And so IN is I means that Alice static key is immediately transmitted to Bob, and in fact that's transmitted immediately after E. And note here that at this point there is no key set, no encryption key set, so this static key is sent in clear. Okay, because if you recall, encryption keys in the cipher states are initialized only when we have a diffie-Hellman operation. So only after this EE we'll have an encryption key. Okay, so this is immediately transmitted. So we have a partial, we have an authentication, a partial authentication of Alice in this case after the handshake is completed. XX, X stands for transmitted, and this means that static keys for both Alice and Bob are transmitted during the handshake, as we can see here and here, while K is the example we have seen before. So K means that one key is known to one of the parties. So for example, if K here refers to Bob, so this means that Bob's static key is known to Alice, while Alice's static key is transmitted to Bob. Then we have these numbers, which means, because in a noise, what we try to do is to perform ephemeral static or ephemeral or static ephemeral static diffeomon operation as soon as possible. But we might decide, for mainly for identity hiding reason, we'll see quickly later, to defer this diffeomon operation to a later message. So for example, just to provide an example here, so after the first ephemeral key is sent, since both static keys were previously known, we might be tempted to already execute an ES operation here. So with the ephemeral key from Alice and the static key from Bob, since the static key is already known to Alice. But since this doesn't happen here, that should be the standard according to noise specification, we might defer it, the ES diffeomon operation, to the next message. And this is exactly why we have a 1. So which means that, key 1 here for Bob, which means that the Bob static key diffeomon operation is deferred to the next message, and the same for Alice after Bob sends, because as soon as Bob sends his own static key, we should have here, around here, or after here, we should have already a Alice static Bob ephemeral key exchange, but this is deferred to the next message. Okay, so these numbers 1, 2, 3 means that simply the static key diffeomon operation is deferred to the next or next two. Why one should defer the diffeomon operation is, we'll see later, is mainly for identity hiding reasons. So to avoid guessing of parties static key by looking at the handshake exchange value or handshake decryption failure and so on. So it's related with the identity hiding, to improve identity hiding features. Yes, which is in this slide. Of course, different handshakes provides different level of securities, and security is organized. There is a ranking of security properties. I mean, the best we can hope for is, after an handshake is completed, is to have strong forward secrecy. So which means that the attacker cannot decrypt messages even in the case is able to compromise static keys, so Alice and Bob static keys. And then this identity hiding property, which we were mentioning before, is by looking at the handshake pattern, or by trying to also to impersonate one of the parties, or by knowing one of the parties static key, he should not be able to understand what is the other party static key. Okay, and this depending on the various on the handshake pattern, this might be reasonable against um, possible against passive attackers or active attackers or so on, or active attackers that impersonates or that breaks. So there are also here a ranking of security property, and authenticity and integrity instead are granted by the underlying symmetric cipher, which is an authenticated encryption with associated data cipher. So, just as a food for thoughts, our final slides, we of course different extensions are possible. The first one relates to the token PSK, which is which stands for a pre-shared key. This token, this extra token, besides E, S, RS, RE, can be used to process some pre-shared key material. So, for example, imagine that Alice and Bob share some encryption key or some hash values and so on. They want to instantiate a new handshake, and they want to already mutually authenticate each other by using some key material, some pre-shared key, and so they can process this PSK, which can be deferred as well as before during the handshake. Another possibilities is to combine multiple handshakes one after each other to obtain the so-called noise pipes, and this can be useful on an application level to authenticate multiple static keys coming, for example, from different applications. For example, I don't know, some smart contract with some other, I don't know, some other smart contract or some address key and so on. And again, why we kept the handshake hash value? We keep updating the handshake hash value every time we receive or we send a ciphertext, is because we can use at the end we can use this hash value first as a session ID, so to identify the noise session, because this will somehow accumulate all exchange messages and will authenticate the channel itself. And also this value can be used on an application level, for example, to authenticate Alice, reciprocally authenticate Alice and Bob outside the noise framework, for example, by signing this hash value or by providing a zero knowledge proof about knowing this hash value and so on. So this, but mainly this handshake hash value is used to have channel binding, so to bind the channel to Alice and Bob. So another thing we were mentioning before, one last thing, is that rekey, one little defect of rekeys is that the new key depends on the previous one. So although we have strong forward secrecy, which means that we cannot decrypt messages even if static keys gets compromised, if we compromise the cipher state, so we compromise the encryption key, we can derive even the new keys, rekeyed keys, and this mainly means that we will have access with a stronger attacker, of course, with a much more powerful attacker. We will have access to all later exchanged messages from one point on. One possible way to address this is to refresh every time, so to maintain the chaining key, so to maintain the full handshake state, symmetric state, and cipher state, and to update the encryption keys, the cipher state keys, with a new ephemeral key for every new sent message. And since we know already the other party static key, we might send the new ephemeral key and do an ephemeral static diffeomorph operation to update the chaining key and then the cipher state key. So this, since we have new randomness every time, this means that an attacker will compromise a cipher state key at some point in time, will be able to decrypt the message encrypted by under that key, but the next message To decrypt the next message, he has also to break the ephemeral key, and that's it. So this is we can have a different way to do a much more powerful rekey operation, which of course is more expensive. So with this, this concludes this little talk, and I will be glad to address your questions. Welcome. Okay. Okay.
Great. So the last item that you mentioned, that we rekey because we want to prevent the attacker to compromise the next message. Sorry, I couldn't get it fully. Can you say it again?
Okay, so what is the? It's probably better to see these slides. Okay. So
Sure.
let's say that this key, the superstate 1 key, is compromised. Okay. So this means that all messages exchanged, inbound and outbound messages exchanged, so this channel is compromised, at least in one direction. And even if we do rekey here, okay, on these two keys, look, the new key depends on the previous key, because all the rest of the information is public. So 000, the first 32 bytes, the nonce is public, empty, unchecked. So this means that once we compromise one encryption key, we will have all consequent keys obtained by rekeying.
Yes.
Okay? So this means that an extremely powerful attacker, because this is a very strong requirement to say that a cipher-state key is compromised, will be able to decrypt all messages from that point on. Okay? Even if parties do rekey. If instead we do, let me see this. If instead we send an ephemeral key every time, I will find the slides. Okay, look. So if we send a new ephemeral key for every message, so we will update the hash value, but then immediately after we do an ES or SE operation like this one. Okay, so we send a new ephemeral key, and then we do, since we know Bob static key, we do a differential operation. So this differential operation will update the chaining key, but also the cipher state key, because we were using a key derivation function. So this means that the new key is independent from the previous encryption key, and even if the previous encryption key gets compromised, the new key, since we refresh it every time we send a new message, or from both Alice sides and Bob sides, the new key is just independent, and an attacker, to recover this key, has to break two things. Has to recover the chaining key, but also to break the new ephemeral key Alice just sends to Bob.
I see.
You see?
Okay, so the attacker doesn't have access to the Bob's static key. It's just the cipher key.
Yes, it's the cipher key. So the attacker compromises it. So compromise one state key, one cipher state key. By doing rekey, it can compute all consequent keys because they are all dependent between each other. At least this is rekey according to specification. But if Alice sends every time, and Bob does the same, every time she sends a message, she sends a new ephemeral key and immediately after performs an ephemeral static differential operation, she will update, and Bob will do the same, she will update the cipher state key and also the chaining key and the cipher state key. So this means that to recover this new key, the attacker has to break the chaining key. So he has to find the chaining key. He has to break the new ephemeral key or one party static key. So it's something more he has to do. Okay?
I see, yes.
So,
but it doesn't have to be the rekey operation, the one that you mentioned with a specific nonce and an empty payload. It doesn't have to be that to prevent this attack. As long as they just exchange new ephemeral keys and they do this differential operation.
No, indeed. So you don't need this rekey if every time you send a new ephemeral key. I mean,
Right.
yeah, because you are protecting yourself from different things. So
Yes.
the thing is that in the security model, you never assume that the cipher state key is compromised, because this is a 32-wise key. So I mean, this is something that you cannot guess. So you have to compromise the device. Okay.
Yes.
And usually when you talk about strong forward secrecy or forward secrecy, you talk about, okay, if we break public keys, if we can recover all messages and so on. So this is a
Right.
different security model. But yes, by doing rekey according to specification, if one of these keys is compromised, then all other key are compromised as well. And by instead exchanging firmware keys at every message, this doesn't happen, or it gets harder for the attacker. So he has to break something more. Thanks to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. I got my answer. Thank you.
Okay.
Cool. If there are no more questions, I think you can probably stop the recording. And
Yep.
thanks, Giuseppe.
Thanks to you.